Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa, and I'm joined here with my colleague, Aeron. We'll be talking a bit today about our curriculum mapping project. We're going to first talk about some important definitions and provide context that will help ground our curriculum mapping project. And then we'll talk about our methodology and process for how we went through our assessment, along with some highlighted preliminary results. We'll then end with discussing opportunities for growth and integrated changes to two of our workshops, along with next steps for our research. So the QDCF was developed by Québec's Ministère de l'Éducation et de l'Enseignement supérieur as part of the Digital Action Plan. The plan promotes effective use of digital technologies for the development of lifelong skills of all Quebecers. The framework aims to identify key dimensions of learning and personal development for 21st century learners, teachers, and non-teaching professionals, and can be used across preschool to post-secondary education. Ultimately, it provides the groundwork for the development of digital competency and promotes the autonomous use, evaluation, and reflection of digital technologies. This framework was identified as appropriate to our context as an academic library makerspace in Quebec because of its local relevance and its holistic approach to digital and critical thinking skills. The framework divides digital competency into 12 dimensions that are very much interrelated, and each dimension is then divided into further elements. The central dimensions of the framework are ethical citizenship and technological skills, and the other 10 dimensions are listed on the slide and include topics such as digital resources for learning and innovation and creativity. The continuum document builds on the QDCF by further defining the scope of each element that makes up a dimension and provides a learning progress matrix for each element. The three levels of the learner's competency development progress include beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And the document also defines digital competency as the ability to find, organize, understand, evaluate, create, and disseminate information using digital tech. It's multifaceted and includes ICT skills, social and collaborative skills, and cognitive skills. It also includes the ability to behave ethically and responsibly. So, Aeron and I's goal for this research was to see if the two workshops we developed, notebook making and zine making, aligned with the programming that had already been created by our wonderful colleagues at the Technology Sandbox Concordia Library's Makerspace. We want to make it clear that our research is not in any way evaluating our colleagues' work. We really set out to see if our workshops aligned with the Makerspace's mission, how they fit into the broader mandate of the sandbox, and whether it's accomplishing bringing in new people to discover new tech through traditional crafting. Our research focuses on workshops that were offered during the 2023 to 2024 academic year. At our institution, the QDCF has so far been used primarily by administration, some instructional services, community work as well, but hasn't really been used at this workshop level before. We wanted to assess the strengths of our workshop and use this as a way to help us enhance our learning outcomes by offering a detailed breakdown of the different components of each digital competency, but also not trying to train for a specific competency, but ensuring that we're making the most of the opportunities that already exist in Aeron and I's workshops. So we had two guiding questions that we developed. What does applying the QDCF as an assessment tool tell us about the sandbox's role in teaching digital competency? And can applying the QDCF as an assessment tool reveal new opportunities for teaching digital competency? We want to mention very briefly how our work fits into the current research landscape. So much of the literature relates to makerspace contexts within K-12 educational and public library settings. For K-12, the research has focused on assessment tools and skill development for K-12 learners and teachers' maker-centered professional development skills. And research on public library makerspace contexts has focused on assessment skills and usage of space. Specific research about the QDCF relates to international framework comparisons, while higher ed contexts focus on QDCF research related to teachers in training here in Quebec. And from our initial review of the research landscape, we identified that we're helping fill a gap for the potential usage of QDCF by librarians working in higher ed contexts and contributing to the academic library makerspace context as well. Pass it over to Aeron.
So we adopted Ritchie and Spencer's framework analysis as our methodological frame, just to add a little bit of structure to the process of applying the QDCF continuum document, which we used as a kind of rubric for workshop or curriculum assessment. So framework analysis, which was originally designed for policy assessment and has been used to assess programs and improve program design and decision-making. So all of that fit well with our goals for the project. Usually, framework analysis is undertaken in 5 steps. The first is collecting data, in our case, gathering slide decks and workshop descriptions. Step 2 is choosing a thematic framework. And of course, we came in knowing we wanted to use this, the digital competency development continuum as this rubric. Step 3 is indexing data, where you kind of apply the various codes, or in our case, the particular framework. And then the next step is charting that data. So usually in framework analysis, this would be creating a spreadsheet where each row represents a participant, each column represents a different code. In our case, because we were coming out of that with kind of numerical values, we kind of integrated that with our first part of our mapping step. And I will show you a screenshot of that spreadsheet in a moment, which brings us to the final step, which is mapping and interpretation. So starting to chart your results and then also doing further analysis. To show you a little more about how we did our indexing step, we used Zotero to store PDFs of workshop descriptions and slides, and then used Zotero's note-taking features to highlight areas where we saw digital competencies coming up, using the tagging system to indicate which dimension was showing up, and then using a comment attached to that highlight to indicate the specific kind of sub-element, and then a rating of 1 to 3, 1 representing beginner competency, 3 representing advanced. And this is a simplified version of that spreadsheet we created in our kind of charting to mapping phase. So you can see we just have columns here for the dimensions. Our full spreadsheet had one for each element. And then this has just a very rudimentary heat map applied. So you can see the areas in darker orange are going to be areas of strength. Over the course of the project, we did run into some challenges and limitations. First, we had most of the workshops that we were assessing were ones that we had either delivered ourselves or had attended. However, there were a few that we hadn't, and we found that it was much more challenging to assess those workshops without that additional context. We also found that we were unable to capture the variations of content between different instructors who gave the same workshop if they were working from the same slide deck. So any kind of additional content that was introduced through discussion or individual pedagogical practices weren't captured. We also found that there were some ideas that we kept coming back to throughout the process that we felt weren't represented in the QDCF, such as competencies related to the history of technology or the integration of older and newer technologies. And this was also something that came up in some of the literature that we read, such as Furer's 2019 research, where in the process of developing similar digital competency framework, they got the same feedback from some librarian colleagues. We also felt that the exclusive focus on digital community in the QDCF and ignored the importance of physically situated communities in the development of digital competency, such as academic makerspaces, classrooms, and public libraries, since for many that is like the first encounter with a lot of these kind of digital competency opportunities. Finally, because we were applying this development continuum document, which was designed for assessing individual learners to assessing a curriculum, there were some kind of interpretive difficulties where descriptions were really geared towards individuals and it was hard to apply to a broader context. So for example, the dimension harnessing the potential of digital resources for learning was a bit tricky. We felt that in some cases, workshops that had slides with further resources and kind of next steps for learners to go further on their own could represent a beginner level competency in this area, but we weren't sure if that maybe needed to have a little bit more kind of more fostering of independence and participants to actually qualify for that beginner level. So that brings us to preliminary results. I'm going to start off with a division of the strengths of the workshops divided by QDCF dimension. So this represents an average across all of the workshops we assessed. So you can see here that the top areas represented in our workshops were Dimension 2, which is technological skills, Dimension 12, which is innovative and creative approach, and Dimension 7, which is producing content. This feels appropriate and not unexpected, given that the exploration of different uses and applications of emerging technologies, and then also using those tools to create content are kind of the core mandates of most makerspaces, including ours. Some of the weaker areas were also interesting. So things like ethical citizenship, information literacy, personal and professional empowerment, and critical thinking. Some of these are areas that we would like to improve in, either by adding more content or just developing what is there already further. Some, like information literacy and critical thinking, are skills that we teach more outside of the makerspace in more traditional library instruction. Others, like communicating, which really focuses on digital communication tools and the skills needed to use those appropriately, is something that we don't currently teach in the library, but it may bear thinking about whether that is something that we want to be teaching in the library. So the next slide here shows our strengths divided by workshop. So again, this represents an overall average score for each workshop across all the different dimensions. So an interesting thing from this one is that the workshops that are kind of having the highest scores represent a balance of technological content and then also opportunities for creative expression. So design for 3D printing, VR Bootcamp, Arduino 101, these are all very hands-on, but also give participants an opportunity to kind of develop their own projects. We also noticed that our zine making and notebook making basics were kind of scoring solidly in the middle. So that was encouraging just based on kind of the initial question we had going into the research. And this is a further breakdown of kind of similar data, although here we're looking at totals rather than averages, but it's showing for each workshop how they scored in each of the different dimensions. An interesting takeaway from this one is that the higher scoring workshops are not necessarily ones that had more advanced content, but instead they're ones that touched on a greater number of dimensions. So what that says to us is that this assessment process is going to value workshops that have a broader, more diverse approach to digital competencies and might actually underrepresent the value of more detailed beginner level skills instruction, particularly if it's focusing on a single tool. So for example, our Introduction to Linux workshop, which is a great workshop, but again, only focuses on a single tool. That said, this assessment process was interesting because it offered an opportunity to identify places that we could add in short contextual or theoretical ideas or discussions to kind of enhance the existing skills-based information. So to try to add in that broader sociological, technological context that is so important to digital competency instruction. So some of the areas that we identified for potential improvement showed up in multiple different workshops. So in this slide here, the circle the number in the circle represents the number of workshops that we flagged these for. We felt that kind of 3 of these, so tools and resources, curiosity and new horizons, and entrepreneurial competencies, all kind of touch on different elements of the same thing, which is empowering participants to go beyond the workshop and then do their own projects just from different perspectives. And then the 5.4 element, so community, this is more about connecting participants with online communities and empowering them to participate in those communities. But again, we are kind of tempering that with our insistence that the physical community that our makerspace represents is also really important for participants. So for that, I hand back to you.
So we're just going to end off by talking about some opportunities for growth and the integrated changes that we've started making in our workshops. For both our notebook making and zine making workshops, we identified that the ethical behavior element that falls under ethical citizenship would be worthy of inclusion. For a beginner level, we would include more information for learners to understand the potential impact of social and cultural diversity and context on interactions via digital technology. And another area for growth specifically for our notebook making workshop is that of consultation of content. This would include incorporating more options in the decorative portion of the workshop. So right now we have 3D printed stamp designs using open source stamp designs. So we would want to include maybe lino cut stamps be made available that were cut using the CNC machine, and as well as more notebook examples to consult. This would be on par with the zine options students can consult in our other workshop. And one aspect we've integrated was the community element under collaborating via digital technology. We incorporate a further resources slide for learners to continue discovery and self-paced learning via various YouTube creators that specialize in this kind of making. And we point them in the direction of online communities that can help them further their knowledge and practice. One area of potential growth for our zine workshop is incorporating the element of reflective attitude towards information, particularly discussions of the ways authority and authorship are disrupted by zine making practices. We've integrated information on online zine websites, so where people post zine content that learners can consult. And this falls under the community element for finding ways to collaborate via digital tech. There are different ways of incorporating these kinds of changes. Sometimes it's really as simple as adding information on a slide. It could be including moderating discussions on a specific topic, and other times it might require a more significant structural change. For notebook making, we recorded videos that matched our print instructions for each binding technique to improve accessibility and provide an option for learning through a different visual medium. So in terms of next steps, our goal is to complete our writing process and submit our findings for publications, hopefully. And now that we have a much clearer understanding of the QDCF, we've been able to identify elements that we wish to integrate further into our own workshops. This will require a bit more brainstorming and adapting of our instructional materials. And finally, when developing new workshops, we have a much better understanding of those dimensions and elements to kind of incorporate and to think about within our instructional design process moving forward. So if you have any questions about our work, we'll be happy to answer them now. If not, please feel free to reach out to both Aeron and I. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Erin. So we have time now for questions.
Francisco.
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Hi. Will this result in some sort of guideline for us to design the workshop?
I think our intention was never for our work to create any like mandatory outcomes for our colleagues. This was much more an exercise for ourselves in trying to figure out how to position these workshops. But I think the question was like, is there a place for paper arts in a makerspace? And I think we are just kind of trying to figure out what the answer to that question is. So this is not going to result in any kind of like Concordia wide policies about our makerspace programming. It's very much more just like for us to try to map what's already happening and how what we were introducing fit with that, if that makes sense. Because what's happening in the makerspace already is so great. And as you could see, like this assessment process like rated that Linux workshop really low because but obviously it is teaching really vital skills with open source operating systems. And like, there's no way that we're not trying to change that particular workshop. It's just trying to figure out like different ways of measuring how to teach digital competencies and whether you can teach digital competencies using these kind of more traditional crafting topics, if that makes sense. So like one of the other things that we evaluated was our Fiber Arts Technology Club. But like no changes are going to be made to that either. It's more just for our own workshops.